All right, we are at the top of the hour, so let's go ahead and get started. Welcome everybody to today's panel discussion. My name is Phan. I'm Amplifi's Chief Revenue Officer. I am super excited to be here today for two primary reasons. The first is naturally, we're really excited about sharing some of our evaluation results of the Salsify PIM platform and giving you guys kind of a little taste of some of the content in the report and the white paper that we will provide to every participant on this webinar. The second reason is, if you guys are anything like me, during COVID and quarantine, there's just been a huge influx of webinars around. And working with Salsify, we decided to take a different approach to today's webinar and make it more of an organic discussion rather than a readout. So disclaimer to that is, while we kind of scripted some of the topics that the panelists are going to discuss, none of the commentary that you guys are about to experience is scripted. So this is coming straight from their brains, very smart people, some of the smartest people I've ever had the pleasure of working with. So I'm super excited for you guys to be part of this. Just a quick view into the methodology of our evaluation. Now, this exhaustive methodology is used a lot around our tool selection projects. Now, with that said, the breadth and depth of our evaluations is usually pretty slim just because we have to evaluate multiple platforms for our clients, et cetera, et cetera. But once our partnership got confirmed with Salsify, we started engaging. They wanted us to run through the full gamut of our evaluation methodology and really put their platform to the test. As you guys can see, a lot of thought and effort goes into our evaluations. So we're just not conducting interviews with the product teams, implementation teams, et cetera. We actually go into the systems, log in, and open up the hood and tinker around. So I'm really excited for today's webinar readout and discussion around it. So taking part in today's presentation and discussion will be Chris Colyar. He is Amplify's Chief Technology Officer. Ametra Tipton, who is our Amplify's Salsify Practice Lead. From Salsify, we have Justin King, who's the Vice President of B2B Strategy. And then finally, last but certainly not least, Beau, who is the Senior Manager of Product Management. A little housekeeping before we begin. The handling of questions. So I'm sure you guys will have a ton of questions coming through. You can submit your questions through the Q&A feature located at the bottom of your window. Questions will be answered when possible or left until the end if we have time. If we don't have time, we are certainly more than eager to follow up in one-to-one sessions, discussions, anything of that nature. Just let us know. Finally, this session is being recorded, and we will be sending this recording out to all of the participants in this webinar. But you can also, in a few days, see the link to download not only the report and white paper, but the recording on our website, goamplify.com. So without further ado, I'm going to kick it off with our first topic of discussion. This discussion is very near and dear to my heart because in today's world, there's a lot of acronyms and buzzwords that are being thrown out for product information management. We have PIM, PXM, PDX, et cetera, et cetera. So sometimes it's easy to get lost in the shuffle of what these market buzzwords mean as it pertains to solving use cases for product information management. So what I want to do is turn this question to the panelists of really what is PIM to them and their definition of PIM in today's world. Spoiler alert, there is not going to be a wrong answer, but it'll be nice to see philosophies around the PIM word in today's market. So without further ado, I'll turn it over to Justin and Beau first to extrapolate what PIM means to you guys.
Yeah, so this is Justin. First of all, this is probably the most in-depth analysis of any platform that I've been a part of. So Amplify team did a fantastic job. You guys pointed out the strengths, but you also pointed out the weaknesses and opportunities in the platform, really for the whole purpose of helping a customer make a great decision, right? You want to make the right decision if you're looking at PIMs. So John, you're absolutely correct. I mean, the word PIM, there's a lot of acronyms: PXM, PDM, PLM, PIM. There's MDM, and there's so many different acronyms. So my simple explanation is that with this push to online and digital, and previously with the push to catalogs, there's a need inside of most companies to manage their product content. So when I talk about product content, I'm talking about transactional and supply chain content like weights, measurements, UPC codes, part numbers, and the things that might show online on a product detail page. So those are things like description, images, attributes. And by the way, that's changing rapidly. So where's this managed today inside of most companies? Most companies manage this with a combination of Excel and our ERP, right? And so that's an effective method if you have 100 products. But when you have thousands of products, scale becomes a problem pretty quickly. So when I think about PIM, I think about it doing 4 things, and it does more than this, of course. But these 4 kind of typical things that a PIM does. So first of all, it aggregates content. So if you have content in a bunch of different sources, or you have a number of suppliers sending you content, that means you have to aggregate all this content into a single place, right? That's a lot of work to do. So aggregate is the first thing. The second thing it does is data management, meaning it has to be able to manage and edit and put into a taxonomy the content that exists for product. The third thing it does after aggregate data management is syndication, meaning most of the time you have to use this content. It has to be pushed out there. It may have to be pushed out to different channels, to distributors, to retailers, to marketplaces. It may need to be pushed out to different systems. So we have aggregate, data management, and syndication. And the last thing is data quality and governance. Big buzzword right now is governance, right? The ability to manage this data with some structure behind it and make sure the quality of the data is good. So I think it's with that aggregate, data management, syndication, and data quality in mind, I think it's important to state that different companies and industries, I mean, they prioritize those 4 things differently. So let me give you an example. Retailers and distributors, they need to get all this content from all their manufacturers and their suppliers. So aggregation becomes very, very important. And in fact, PIM was originally used by retailers and distributors to create their large catalogs. However, brand manufacturers have these unique needs that really no other platform has ever focused on until now. So for example, brand manufacturers need to get their content out to their retailers, their distributors, their marketplaces. That's about syndication, right? So for a retailer distributor, it's about aggregation. For a brand manufacturer, it's about publication, syndication. So it's just different, right? And really until now, no other company has addressed this. And we're very, very purposeful about this. Is purpose built for brand manufacturers and this unique requirements. Chris and Ametra, do you guys have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I love what you're saying about data management and data governance, because of the 4 things you listed, I think those are when I talk PIM, like the core assets of PIM, that's to me what people are really looking to solve. They normally have a lot of systems in their ecosystem, managing, receiving direct materials, managing shipping, finished goods, tracking sales, tracking forecasts. There's a lot of operational systems, and pretty much all of those operational systems have this assumption that you're going to fit the data to that system. And the gap that you're talking about, Justin, that's being filled by Excel is the fact that at the end of the day, the definition of their data isn't necessarily operational. It's not something they're trying to optimize and fix in place, because to your point, it needs to be flexible. It has to move as fast as a business. So it needs to be controlled, but flexible. And so that's where that data management, data governance line, I think, is really important. And the inputs from aggregation and the outputs from syndication are important, but really those are just getting all of the value from the management and governance that you're putting in place applied to the upstream, downstream systems. So completely agree with your factors. And when we go into a company, we're talking about the importance of PIM is it's not an operational system that's necessarily going to be driving day-to-day transactions, but everybody that's consuming that data, where it came from, and that it's good data. So you still have that trust now in your ecosystem, and you're not looking at 2 spreadsheets saying which one was the right spreadsheet, or missing, like, okay, who made that change? Why did they make that change? And losing track of things. So as you were talking about this transition upstream into PIM, those are where we absolutely are focusing.
So you think that data management and governance are kind of the common through line through all of PIM selections?
Yeah, that's,
Hmm.
I would say for the most part, like you said, in retail, aggregation can be a big place, especially if you're trying to compete in the marketplace. But those are rarer cases. The governance is, I think from our perspective, governance is always the biggest push.
One thing to add to that though, Chris, is that, you know, when a retailer or distributor picks an ERP, they don't just pick any ERP, right? They pick an ERP that was built for their business or their industry, right? A retailer distributor would never pick a manufacturing based ERP. Manufacturers would never pick a ERP that was built for retailers and distributors. Yeah, but in the PIM world, we have been kind of one size fits all,
It's
right?
a PIM's a PIM.
PIM's a PIM,
So,
but is it, right? I mean,
right.
you know, our perspective of PIM is not a PIM when it comes to the unique requirements of both sides, right? And there's probably other industries to add into that, right? Above retailers, there's technology and all kinds of different other industries. But we think it's important to pick a PIM that was purpose built for the industry or the type of company you are, which in this case is manufacturing.
Yeah, and it was a little cathartic for us as we dove into the Salsify platform, where there were some things that were like, you guys are weak here, and you were like, no, we're not weak, we just don't care. Like you were so laser focused on a complete experience for your customer that you actually challenged us some on a global PIM definition, like I'm going to walk to the aisle in the store and pick a PIM off the shelf, to having this fit for purpose specialized area where I'm going to go buy a brand manufacturer PIM. So we really appreciated the back and forth that we had around your laser focus and challenging our view that a PIM isn't just a PIM. You should kind of fit your PIM to the market, to the industry. So completely agree with you that the requirements are different and the weights of the outcomes can be very different from a tool selection perspective. Even for brand manufacturers across, you know, two different industries. So automotive versus CPG. I mean, you have different requirements.
Very true.
Beau, Ametra, anything else to add here?
Ametra, you looked like you're ready to jump in.
Yeah, I was just going to say on the point of a PIM being a specific tool for a specific customer. From my experience just doing the implementations I did prior to jumping into evaluation, Salsify, I kind of have that lens of this is what I expect, you know, years of experience doing implementations, but to obviously be working with Justin and Beau and have them go, our PIM has a purpose, right? And this is our specific customer. I think that that's great to start with to kick us off today. Yeah. With that being said, I think we're ready to transition to our next topic, guys. So Beau and Justin, in reading the white paper from our evaluation, was there anything in particular that sparked your interest that you want us to jump into next?
Yeah, I mean, so my favorite topic, probably the most controversial part of the paper, I would argue, I think it was chapter 3, page 7. So anybody watching this that hasn't downloaded this, we'll make sure you have a link to be able to download this incredible evaluation by Amplifi. But it states the death of the single source of truth. So let me read you a quick quote from the paper. It's on the right-hand side. The classic single source of truth gives us an authoritative description of what the product is. But to truly capture and convert a consumer or a customer, right, that information must be presented in a manner that speaks to their needs, context, and emotion. So what you're saying is, while we do need a single source of truth, we also need lots and lots of single sources of truth. And I would love to hear Chris and Ametra explain what you meant by this. And maybe we can talk about what's a little bit controversial about it as well.
Yeah, I remember when we were iterating on death as single source of truth, this concept internally, we actually had some challenge, like that's a little too bold. We shouldn't put that in the white paper. But I felt that it was absolutely appropriate personally, because I've spent the last 10 years almost like going toward this holy grail, like where I wanted to end up was the ultimate single source of truth. Like my entire career in MDM was dedicated to, like, there is one truth and we have to get to that truth. And if we get to that one truth, then by God, we have achieved like perfection. And what I realized a few years ago is that like, that's, you know, that perfection was really myopic. It was so laser focused in this tiny area. You could have all of the best data about your product in the world, but if nobody's buying it, you failed as a business. And so what I realized is that my single source of truth was way too one-dimensional. And while it is absolutely critical to have all of the facts about your product and to have all of the traceability and controls and compliance, like there are a lot of things that you must have a single source of truth. Then what I realized is you have to fit that to every single channel from a trend. Like I'm going to integrate with that distributor or that retailer and give them my data in the way they need it so they can optimize how they do business. Even just streamlining that process with them, or down to the consumer who's going to be going to 3 different retail locations that I sell my product at. I want to give them experience across those locations. And I want my experience to linger with them, almost like a relationship between me and them, not necessarily relying on the channel they're in. And so what I realized is that that single source of truth was really good, but that's like half of the journey or less. And the rest of that journey was sitting there and taking it and changing it to be the single source of truth for that channel or that consumer or that segment of the market. So the death of the single source of truth, it's still alive and well, but we have to make a bold claim to push back on it because people think it's 100% of the problem. Now we're saying it's 50.
Yep. And I know in working on implementations with customers where I'm seeing their thinking change, right? Because so many times they're ready to implement their PIM, they're coming into it, that's the #1 tagline, single source of truth. Mm-hmm. But then once you get working and you have those nuanced conversations, it changes and you're like, well, no, this is the product is the product, but let's talk about how we're going to connect to our consumers. Let's curate the data for them.
Yeah, I think that that's really interesting too, because it reflects a lot of our experience at Salsify. You know, my experience there over the last 4.5 years and watching the company grow. And really, like, it also goes back to that question of what is a PIM, right? PIMs are becoming these cross-functional platforms that you need marketing, you need, you know, operations, you need copywriters, you need all these people involved in. So it's kind of broken out of its IT-centric area and sort of expanded to be a platform across that bridges these gaps in companies. And as you look at specifically at brands, you know, they're hopefully undergoing all these digital transformations. And really, you know, for us, one of our challenges has been how do you cater to that future world where you're kind of, you know, knocking down these silos and at the same time supporting exactly what Chris was talking about earlier around like the governance and the data quality and integrity that you need. And it's like this incredible tension that I think every PIM that's really trying to actually be the source of truth has to sort of tackle.
Yeah, and I love what you're saying there, Beau, around the kind of that push-pull between IT and business, because I think, you know, kind of tied with my realization of the death of single source of truth was the realization that, you know, PIM is a business tool. It's not an IT tool. You know, we want the keys to be handed to business because they're the ones that are driving the revenue. They're driving the top line. They need to make changes to respond in order to improve how they're performing. So we need to equip them with a tool that allows them to do that. Now, obviously, the governance and those aspects are the guardrails that we need because the entire IT infrastructure has to be in alignment. You're absolutely right that a big push of this is giving business the power to be successful.
Well, and I think it's about the adoption too, right? If it's a business tool, the chances of getting internal adoption of the tool is stronger than if it's just an IT tool. I come back in this conversation to, you know, if you have a platform, a PIM platform, purpose-built for brand manufacturers, right? Brands need a central source of truth, of course, right? They need, you know, there's information about the product that should not change.
Yeah, weights and dims, like you were saying.
Right, weights and dims, different attributes of the product, the material types. I mean, there's lots of that, right? But you also might need different content on your own site. You might send different content to your own site than you would send to Amazon, maybe different from Amazon to Target because the customers are different. And also there's some data that doesn't make sense to include in the PIM. There's an example on Amazon where Amazon has a requirement that says, is batteries included? If you're an apparel company, is batteries included? Yes or no? Isn't part of your PIM, right? You might just want to store that type of content in the channel. Well, if you're storing content in the channel, isn't that now, don't we have multiple sources of truth? And that's what it comes back to, right?
And I think what's interesting there, right, is like I do some of our trainings for new hires and I talk about this problem a lot. And it's sort of like this abstract concept, right? But I pull up like an Amazon and a Target product detail page and ask people to point out the differences. And it's like slight differences in the titles, but like one of the big differences between Target and Amazon is like on Amazon, you can put basically whatever you want in an image. And on Target, you cannot put any text there. And so when you think about like, that sounds like a really simple challenge, but if you're a globally distributed company with thousands of employees and you've suddenly got to produce 2 different versions of the same image and have it go live and have them all go through the same approval chains and know that you've got these 2 versions live, it's an incredibly big challenge.
Yeah. And and that's why we say it's 50% of the problem. Like we went from 0 to 50, and really the image I like to draw is, it's like a tree trunk, and it's massive and it's thick, and there's a lot of process and a lot of people, and you have, R&D and product management, and they're making decisions on what to produce and what to carry. What are we doing next year? And that huge trunk, you get to the end of that, you've gone through PLM, you've sourcing, you figured out your margins, you now have, sellable goods sitting on a pallet, and you're, these finished goods are ready to go. But that's great. I actually, at the Salsify conference, one of your speakers was saying, like, we were really good at making stuff. And that's a lot of the times what brand manufacturers can pat themselves on the back and say, we make the best stuff. But then how do they actually get a consumer to choose that stuff? Because there's no impetus for the consumer to buy their thing versus the competitor's thing. And so that 50%, the tree trunk breaks into branches and branches and branches and branches. And each one of those small branches has its own data, like you're talking about, Beau,
Yep.
where the title here, this segment of the market is very focused on features and functions. This segment is very focused on having an emotional relationship or familial
Yep.
spin to how they're going to connect. And we see that, like Ametra said, we see that a lot. And so the product manager and the key decision makers at the company that are making the stuff, it's very important for them to have the intention, like they're feeling a need in the market with all of this manufacturing horsepower. Now we need to give the channel, like the person who's responsible for engaging a part of the market or engaging a channel, they need to be given that and say, okay, here's what you're working with, go. And then that's where that source of truth starts fragmenting into the individual channel source of truth. And I like what Justin said is at some point you might realize that, hey, batteries included might have been a channel attribute. Let's feed it back upstream. Like if we're noticing it having effects, let's bring it back up because maybe that's core.
That's a funny example, actually, because we have a customer who, when that attribute showed up as required, it took them an unbelievable amount of time to get the answer, where they basically had to call factories and have them actually like rip open packages to see if the batteries were in them. It's like the disconnect between where manufacturing occurs and what actually gets in that box and like what you need when you are trying to get content to Walmart is crazy. And the thing I wanted to point out too is that, I see this as the great challenge of PIM moving forward. I think that PIM has moved into the business space. I think that, there are plenty of credible PIMs that do that really well. I think the challenge of how do you represent one and many sources of truth at the same time is like the holy grail of problems, and a problem that I think Salsify is tackling. I don't think we have all the answers because this is an incredibly complex problem. But, when I think about what I'm excited about, where PIM I think is going to evolve, it's going to be around how do you understand like, man, this content's performing really well here. I want to move it here. How do I understand that, my team rewrote this SEO copy for this specific .com site of mine. And, I need to send that through an approval chain like this. When you think about the technology you need to back it, it's incredibly complicated. And then going back to our other question, we think about the people who need to consume it. A lot of those folks don't care about the underlying technology. They don't want to be exposed to like, merges and branches and all these other things, right? They just want to be able to say
thumbs
like,
up, thumbs down.
Exactly. And it's like, that is the incumbent challenge on every single player in this space right now.
Awesome. Well, I'm going to chime in, guys, a little bit. And I know Chris mentioned at the top of this topic that there was some internal at Amplify here, some challenges. So I'll raise my hand and say I was the first one to challenge Chris when he sent the draft of that section over. Because, I'm in front of the clients, and one of the very first questions we ask all of our clients is, what are your business drivers? Why are you implementing a PIM? What are you trying to achieve from a business value perspective? And to Ametra's point, the most consistent business driver across the board is single source of truth. So when Chris submitted his draft and I looked at it, I was like, hey man, I don't know if we can say this. But then he started explaining it, and the philosophy behind it, and it just clicked with me that this is so true in today's market. But alas, we can talk about our philosophies around PIM and things of that nature all day. Let's get to why everybody's on this webinar, and it's let's dig deep into the Salsify platform. So, Justin,
I'm curious, Chris and Ametra, you guys spent days with our team kind of digging into this, right? What what were the biggest kind of surprises to you in your evaluation? And I'd love to both talk about the positives and the negatives, right? We have people on the phone that want to make a good decision. We want them to help them make a decision. What were the things that surprised you guys most in your evaluation?
Yeah, so there are definitely two main things I think that surprised Chris and I a lot in going through our evaluation. The first one that I would love for Chris and I to chat through is going to be around workflows, and coupled with workflows, automation as well. So I know, Chris, when we kicked off during our evaluation of Salsify, initially when you got exposed to the workflows, you had an impression and it kind of changed along the way. So can you kind of talk about that a bit?
Yeah. So you judge a book by its cover. You judge a piece of software by what you've heard other people say. You know nothing about it. So going into Salsify, we understood that Salsify was a syndication platform. We'd ran into Salsify in the market as a downstream consumer of PIM implementations. We were interested because we're like, hey, this is great from a syndication perspective. You can solve a problem that some of these providers we're working with can't. And so I had this assumption about the workflow that it was just really a task manager for users to go and do their job and click done. And coming from PIM platforms, I'm thinking, well, every business is different. The user groups, the roles, the data model. So the workflow has to be pretty much this framework. You can't just have a workflow. You have to let each customer build the workflow to fit their business process. I got into Salsify and I got a little deep and I'm like, okay, yeah, I can do this. That's more than I thought. I could do this. That's more than I thought. And I remember, and I think it was Beau, we were having the conversation with. I was like, I even challenged Beau. I was like, Beau, I can't do this. I can't do that. And what Beau actually did was pull up a game of blackjack where somebody at Salsify had built a game of blackjack where, dealer stands on 17, you can hit or stand. And this is all in the workflow engine. So what I saw was this depth. So a lot of the PIM problems and workflows that we deal with, to Ametra's point, are related to automation. And so you want to remove an end user from doing something as much as you can. I'm a firm believer that people should be doing creative work and making business decisions. And if it's rote tasks or something that can be replaced by an algorithm, we should, because it'll be faster and more accurate. And so the deeper I dug into Salsify, the more I realized that with the Salsa bots and the relationships and the routing and lists, the power of lists, by combining those, a lot of the use cases that we came to the table with that I'm originally either just assumed we're going to fail, or in some cases I said the PIM couldn't solve it. We actually said it can, and it had been able to since before we ever talked to Salsify. So I think workflows for me was one of the shocking strengths.
I just want to highlight, I think that the workflows are a really interesting example of what I was talking about, where it appears pretty simple in the platform, and then the complexity and what actually powers it is mind-bogglingly complicated in some ways. But you can really end up, it's nice because, like you saw, Chris, you can actually drag and drop and build your own workflows there as a business user. And if you have a partner or a consultant come in, they can also build much more sophisticated workflows, that are completely customized on top of that engine. So I think it's a good example of kind of that like depth of complexity you need with kind of a simplified, easy to access interface on top of it.
But what is that, Chris, what does that do for customers? So what is the workflow in you guys' perspective? What does that give to a customer? What's the benefit to them?
Yeah. So you talk about, passing Excel around, and a lot of the times, that's, frankly, what our customers are doing for a PIM solution in order to generate content. And we're talking billion-dollar companies are emailing spreadsheets around. And the reason they're doing it is they know different people at different points in time have to create content, have to approve content. They know their dependencies. And most of our customers, if you sit down with them for a week or two, you're going to get this massive business process from ideation all the way to the sell. And like, they know what it is intuitively, but it's not always on paper. And so what the workflow does is it's kind of twofold. One, just by codifying a workflow into the tool, you have a chance to optimize. So, because they're going to realize, hey, why are we doing it this way? We can streamline it. But then two, you start to be able to track who is doing what. They're getting notified quicker. It's not just an attachment in email. You have revisions, you have notes in the tool. You're having guidelines like, hey, here are the 4 fields you need to fill out. You're not getting a spreadsheet with 88 columns. There's all sorts of things that we're looking at a workflow to kind of change the user's perspective on how they're working and really expedite how content is getting created. At the end of the day, that's going to be one of the biggest drivers for a workflow for us, is taking a 2-week process and making it a 3-day process.
Yeah, I think and utilizing a tool like Salsify for workflows, obviously, to guide those business processes, it's a huge win, right? When we're able to take those manual tasks that users are doing, be it passing those spreadsheets around or putting paper on each other's desk, and putting it in a tool, having the ability to give them feedback when we talk about validations and all of that stuff. But I also like, after that fact, when you have conversations with the customer and they see how huge a workflow is for them, and they start pinpointing things in their process, their business process, that they can alter using a PIM tool. I think that's cool as well.
Yeah, it helps you quantify ROI a lot easier. So absolutely, that's a good.
Does IT get mad in this process, in your perspective? Like, I mean, one thing you're saying, right, is the business user can do this. They can set everything up they need in a workflow. You can build Blackjack using the workflow engine. I'd love to see that, by the way. What does IT think about that?
So my background's in software development, so I consider my lineage IT. I don't think IT should care, and a lot of the times we'll push back because from our perspective, where IT comes into play is the inputs and outputs of the system. So we need to make sure that the system fits with the ecosystem, and the end-to-end operations risks are mitigated, and all those factors are in place to satisfy IT's needs. But if the business needs to work differently and more efficiently, then we need to fit the workflow to the business. And the process needs to be as portable and flexible as it can, because we, like Ametra said, they might find a hotspot. They might come in and say, hey, we want to remove this approval, get things going in parallel, and then we'll put one big approval gate at the end. Let's roll that out in 2 months. IT doesn't even need to be aware of that, because the inbounds and outbounds didn't change. And all IT is going to see is the results of data flowing faster, and now your time to market is reduced.
Which is great. And I know, Justin, when you kicked us off, you said, what things surprise us about Salsify? So we've obviously talked through workflows. The next one that I do want us to spend some time talking about, Chris, is the modeling and Salsify. So when we talk about data modeling, specifically around taxonomy, inheritance, the relationships that we're able to store in the system, let's have a discussion about that. So Salsify's data modeling approach.
Yeah, and this one was actually really fun. So when we first began talking to Salsify, we had a philosophical meeting of minds of this kind of concept of single source of truth is half the problem, and then fitting each individual customer or consumer was half the problem, and the melding of. And so when we began to look into the tool, we actually looked into some of our really complex data modeling challenges on brand manufacturers that we'd run into, because a lot of the times, a product for a brand manufacturer is not just a row with columns. The data is much more complex than that. And when we first started talking to Salsify, some of the use cases, Salsify couldn't, like the tool just wasn't ready for the use cases that we presented. But what I really liked about is that conversation pivoted into a really deep dive of the current strategic roadmap that Salsify is working on, as well as Salsify grilling us. It was like, give me a customer that you need to do this in. Show me, here's a whiteboard marker. Let's get on the board and draw the problem out. And Salsify went away, and the strategic roadmap, this fit right into what they were already investing in around governance and taxonomy. And so when it came time for us to agree and do the evaluation, because we asked for a lot of access in order to do the evaluation. We wanted a sandbox. We wanted full access to all the features. We wanted access to the product teams, those kinds of stuff. So when we got a timing and the availability on our side to dive into the platform, Salsify said, oh yeah, remember all that stuff? Here it is. And so that was really surprising because of the velocity with which it was delivered. And specifically the areas that I think went from a miss to something that was a hit was the taxonomy. So being able to define this is a product and of this taxonomical definition. So, it is a display device, and every display device that we manufacture is going to have this level of core attribution. The ability for us to build that out, and then at that display device, we could build out an inheritance structure, or what we call an object model. So a product's not always a product. You probably are used to style, color, SKU if you're in apparel, but it could be platform edition. Every customer has a different way to look at the thing hanging off the end of the taxonomy. So that was available. That could be configured differently by taxonomy node. And then references, the inner product references. So now all of a sudden a product isn't a product. A product could have an aggregate relationship to other products. So all of a sudden we had this holistic view of like, you know, instead of just a row, you have this family, you have brands, you have product lines, the individual SKU, the variants of the SKU, like SKU, you have all these different things. And Salsify came back and said, okay, we built it. Now go show us how you can use it. So that was shocking to me because of my software background, for it to be production ready within the small time frame from the initial conversation to when we did the deep dive evaluation and saw it with my own eyes. That was a huge surprise. So definitely applaud the effort there.
Yeah, so for us, Justin, pretty much workflows, obviously the automation that we touched upon, and the modeling capabilities is what actually really did surprise us during our evaluation. Obviously, we talked a lot about the strengths, but I do think Chris and I did point out some other opportunities to grow.
I think we're out of time. I think we're out of time. It was nice conversation with you guys.
No, I mean, Ametra, that's a good point. I mean, you know, we're talking about the sunshine and lollipops. So I'm going to challenge Beau and Justin a little bit here. So in the evaluation, you know, where you guys scored low for areas of improvement was in the integration framework space, which is kind of near to Chris's heart. So I'm going to go ahead and pass it to Chris to kind of explain and justify why we scored you guys so low there.
Yeah. So we go into a customer, they want a PIM. The PIM has no operational purpose. It's there to make sure you have good data and that the data can be exposed to the rest of the enterprise. It's something that's trusted. It meets all your quality gates. So if that's the purpose of the PIM is to be this originator of your intellectual property of the data representation of your product, well, then you have to connect to other systems in your enterprise. Otherwise, you've lost all that value. You can't just sit in a vacuum. And so the way we classically connect it is you have inbound integrations coming from any ERP in the world. I mean, it could be a green screen transaction system from the 80s, which we've done. You have outbound, could be going to WMS, could be going, like, you have all these different things in place. And so we want to see the ability to go into any one of our customers with any one of our application ecosystems. And as an implementer, we do strategy, we do implementation. As in the implementation, we want to be able to configure it, and we want to be able to hand those keys to the customer and let them configure it to their ecosystem. Yep. And Salsify didn't give us that framework. Yep. So Justin, I know we've gone back and forth and Beau on that topic.
So I think it's really interesting, and I think it's a very fair kind of point about where Salsify is as a platform right now. And part of it kind of comes back to what you guys talked about before, which is like Salsify originated as a syndication tool and has since evolved into a real PIM platform. And when you think about that, right, like we were working 4.5 years ago, we were working with companies on a much smaller scale mostly, and it was this scrappy, just get things done. Let's feed Salsify through CSV exports out of your other systems because it just worked and it was fast. And what we've done as we've grown and as we've worked, as we've become a big part of Mars and L'Oreal and these other huge global deployments is we custom build a lot of integrations for customers between Salsify and other internal systems, whether those inbound and outbound. And one big part and one big thing I've spent a lot of time talking about with the team over the last 6 months is like, how do we build like a partner-friendly ecosystem? Like we have all these awesome tools, right? We have the ability for other teams within Salsify to define external requirements, to build out custom connectors essentially. And how do we basically let, Chris, like you come in and just plug right into that and start adding your own, which would I think start to really, really solve a lot of that problem. And then the other thing I'll just say is, as I think the digital maturity is increasing among brands, other things like ESBs, like MuleSoft, for instance, are becoming like super critical business tools. And Salsify, we really need to figure out how to start building out kind of, out of the box integrations to those, just as we've seen those platforms rise within our customer base.
But we have a philosophy too of trying to own as many of these connections as possible, right? So that it's not a bunch of custom work. Yeah, we try to own it. So that's got to present some big challenges. Yeah, when you think about scale and the number of customers we have and SaaS, how do we
Yeah,
deal with that?
It's super interesting. Is like, you know, I think another fundamental tension for us, and again for any other PIM in the market, is how do you deliver, you know, like Chris said, an experience that's out of the box for a business user, and then also be able to pull that you know, pull everything back and let you know, an Amplify come in and like basically tinker really far under the hood. And it's a huge both implementation challenge and like a gigantic usability challenge. But, you know, I think Justin, you bring up a really good point. Like, you know, we can have customers like we could have a mutual customer with a partner who, you know, they care about one channel. It's the most important channel for them. And, you know, for us strategically, it may be less important. And that's an opportunity for us to let someone else come in and actually own that and give that third party all the tools they need to be wildly successful maintaining that connection for that customer to basically, you know, make all of us successful at that. So it's a great point.
Yeah, and I think the relationship between your customer champions and the actual you know, platform so that you can build these out is super critical. I talk in, you know, big crayon statements. So when I say like that's a single source of truth or I don't care, you know, we had conversations with you know, the team at Salsify where they told me like I don't care because they're like, you know, at the end of the day, if a brand manufacturer comes to them and has these critical, you know, 4 critical inbound integrations and 2 critical outbound integrations, they're like, we will get it done. Here's, you know, it'll take this many days per integration. There we go. Show me your implementation timeline. Okay, why are you complaining? So at the end of the day, the problem could be solved. So it wasn't a gap in functionality. It just, to Beau's point, like I want the keys. And a lot of times we do, you know, our most successful customers are the customers who get trained in the technology, who take ownership of it, because we can talk up flexibility all we want, but at the end of the day, if they're not the ones driving it, it's going to get stale in their ecosystem. So this is one of those areas where business and IT can start playing together in the tool, because IT absolutely owns integrations.
Talk to Chris, explain this. So on the chart here, we have integration. Integration overall is scored pretty well, but you have inbound and outbound that are obviously low. What do you mean? What did you mean in the evaluation about inbound, outbound?
Yeah, so inbound is just so love the question. So when you talk about does IT care about if workflows change, or when we talk about the flexibility of the business, to me that's all in the garden of the Salsify platform. So IT shouldn't care, and the reason they shouldn't care is because of the safety of integration contracts. So regardless of what the data looks like before it got to Salsify coming from the PLM system, we know Salsify will always consume this data in this format, which will then start this workflow and invoke these users to work. And as the model changes in Salsify, as long as that contract didn't change, that's inbound, is how do I map any data source coming from any format, whether it's a CSV, whether it's a message queue, whether it's coming from MuleSoft and a JSON message, like anything coming in, we have an agreed contract, and now it invokes a process in Salsify. That's inbound. And it can be very different because you're going to have multiple input systems. And then outbound is that same contract going out is I have to map the Salsify model, the final thing, the enriched content, to other systems. And if on that evaluation you saw connectors was really high, because frankly, coming from the syndication arm, you guys, your view on connectors and how you manage across your customer portfolio, like we will connect you to Target and Amazon, and you don't even have to work, like I know nothing about connecting to those guys. So that to me is the connector side, which is slam dunk. The outbound is the janky studio photography system that they built in house. You got to send the data there so they can take the picture.
Like SAP or
well, that's not janky, but yeah.
Chris,
I mean,
too
exactly.
on me, don't use technical terms like janky.
But yeah, exactly, Justin. Like SAP, like what are the other systems? Because you know, even SAP, you know, probably half of our customers that we've implemented with use SAP, and no SAP integration has been the same.
Right.
So to me, inbound and outbound is hitting those flexibility.
You guys, there's another section in there where it was, I think it was around data governance. And so you were talking about the user interface. So you gave us high marks for usability, but low marks for extensibility of the UI. I mean, what is that in your view? What does that mean? And maybe Beau, if there's a response to that on our side too.
Well, so I'll let Ametra talk about usability. I'll talk about extensibility. We'll give you the
and I got responses for both of you. So
nothing but good things for me, Beau. You got high marks on usability. So always going into introducing, I know our team on our side to Salsify always kind of start off with, it's a cool tool. It looks really slick, right? And it is super easy to use, even in the interactions that we've had, obviously starting back at the evaluation phase, even to now working with actual customers. There are a lot of wows when we go through a lot of the processes, and I'll just pinpoint specifically on imports, for example. We were just talking about integrations. So the ability to bring the data in, and essentially you have a saved import configuration that's super digestible, right? For business users, they can see the data they're bringing in. How are we mapping that, right? What does that look like in Salsify? Oh, this is my product detail screen. It's really easy and digestible to break down. Obviously the platform itself, when you're going from the centralized data to the channels, even going to the way that you guys present those direct connections. It's clear who the retailer is and what their expectations are, utilizing readiness reports. So definitely high marks on the usability side of things from us.
Yeah, completely agree. Like, it's very much a what you see is what you get, like from the sales cycle to the implementation. I mean, there's no smoke and mirrors. This is the platform. And like Ametra said, you can throw a new user at it and have them doing a job in a couple days. So the usability side is great. And especially, I think, Justin, you were talking about it, kind of the age of PIM in general. There are some tools on the market that, we will work with, or we'll replace, and we're looking at how the users are interacting, and it's archaic, like tabbing through green screens, those kinds of things. So usability, I mean, it's a modern platform that's constantly up to date. The extensibility comment comes from, there's a small segment of our customers that are they fall into two categories. One, they're giant, and they have dedicated shared services, IT teams. And so they're trying to brand all internal tools and fit a model of working so that they have a relationship with their employees that's consistent. Or the other customer that falls into the same group, it's a smaller company, but they're very much on the technical frontier, like they're cutting edge digital. So they might be a fashion company that does a lot on e-com, like they just know their stuff. And in both cases, we have requirements get pushed to us where, the default UI is never good. Like they want to do CSS stylings. They might have, we always do 2 columns, or we do these widgets. We want to inject a call out. So we want to do an iframe where you're going to pull up and you're going to call another system to do a real-time query. And then you're going to select something, and then it's going to do an AJAX call back to that. So they have the concept in their head and they have those requirements. And the extensibility hit was really like, okay, in other tools, we've had to sling some, JavaScript and stuff to get there. Can we do it? But, Salsify is a SaaS system, and there was some reluctance on your part to just flat out and say, yeah, here's the the wrench, start turning.
Yeah, I think, from our perspective, it's a lot of kind of balancing that usability and customizability challenge.
Yeah, they absolutely are doing that.
Yeah, and it's like, part of it is too, we have 850 plus customers now. We have a support team. It's really nice for our support team to know that every single customer is using the same page, right? They don't log in and they're like, what is this? But that being said, this is not an uncommon request, right? We have a couple big CPG customers I can think of who have, I've been on the phone with them, and they're like, I just want this to look like, basically the sell sheet that I send to my vendors. Yep. I kind of want this to look like my e-commerce site. And so we've done a whole bunch of work over the last year and a half or so to really kind of rewrite a lot of the front end architecture of the platform that's starting to allow us to open up some more customizability, not at the level of putting logos and things like that I think for Salsify is probably farther away, but more along the lines of, if you want to lay out elements in a certain way, if you want 2 columns, if you want things like that, we are slowly evolving the model. And part of it is, we want to evolve it so that, our end consumers can take advantage of it, but also so that, if you're a small team and not super technical on that stuff, you can bring somebody in and they can very easily and very efficiently come in and just say, oh, here's the pages you need. So, again, really thinking about, it's something that's been on the top of our mind. And I think it's a totally fair point about where the platform is today.
I guess one last question from me to anybody on the Amplify team. So we've talked a lot about the distinction between a brand and a manufacturer from other businesses, right? And this is purpose-built. How do you guys view your evaluation in the context of B2B and B2C? B2B being probably manufacturers, B2C being brand manufacturers.
Yeah. So I think in the context of the recipient of the data, I think the evaluation stands, but I do think there's almost two parallel tracks of what you guys have built at Salsify to support each. So when I look at the B2B problem, you know, you're getting data to a channel, and the goal of you as a manufacturer to get the data to that channel is to reduce as much friction as possible. So, you know, you're a pleasure to do business with from their perspective, and it's getting there quickly. And then really their goal is to optimize how much product they're going to sell through the channel. Like they are incentivized for that. So you want to equip them to do what they need to do best. And a lot of the times when we are doing an implementation with a brand manufacturer, I mean, within the first couple months, like that's the goal, is we need to connect to these places today. I mean, and some of these timelines, I mean, they're like 3 weeks from now, we need to have this many products on that channel. And we're in a sales cycle going, wait, what? So that, to me, the B2B side, it's very technical. You have, you know what the recipient is looking for. You can instantly know whether your data meets that or not. And so I think a lot of the investment of the velocity in Salsify is to get me to that B2B connection. Where the B2C connection is, it's a lot less technical because it's a lot harder to get that instantaneous feedback. B2B, you know if you met their requirements or not. You have, within your platform, you can even evaluate my data before I send it to the channel to tell me, am I adhering to best practices on that channel? Like, you have that in place for some of the optimizing how they're going to transact with your data in the B2B space. The B2C space, to me, is all about that flexibility. It's all about, how do I update my content over time? Because the changes you make aren't going to be as readily apparent. You're going to have to use analytics to come back and see, okay, who is converting? When are they converting? How are they converting? And then bring that all the way back upstream and start to change how you're working with the data. It's a lot slower of a cycle of data, and it's a lot more subtle. And so the B2C side, to me, is you changing that data quite frequently, and then hitting a lot of different channels. So, if you're sending your data to one store, one retail outlet, then you're going to capture those customers. If you send it to 10 retail outlets, yeah, you're going to get the customers across the 10, but then somebody who goes to each of those 10, you're going to have a much stronger relationship with them. And then some of the things on your roadmap, like, I remember we had this deep conversation, and as much as I'm a technology guy, I'm a technophile or technophobic as well. So we were talking about Instagram and using Instagram as an outlet for product content. And at the first blush, I'm like, well, that's silly. Why would I ever want Instagram as an outlet for product? But then the more I thought about it, I was like, that's a B2C channel. Like, it's not that you're actually looking necessarily to always convert a sell in that channel, but by gosh, if you've got a consumer who hits your product in that channel, you want them to have the same experience, because now it's an additive part to the relationship. So I see the B2C is you have to have a lot of fine touch points to your consumer, where B2B, you have a lot of thicker touch points to your customer. And you really, if you're going to optimize your success, you have to have both, because the B2B is a means to end, the B2C is the end.
Yeah, I mean, I think too, one of the levels of distinction is that in the B2C world, there's a lot more sophistication on the retailer marketplace side, right? Mm-hmm. The ability to be able to digest this information. On the B2B side, the distributors are struggling. They're just starting this journey of data aggregation and content portals and things like that. They're just starting this, right? And so there's a lack of sophistication. And in the retail side, you might have a half a dozen retailers you send content to. In the B2B side, you have hundreds of distributors, hundreds. I mean, you have 12 major distributors, national mm-hmm. distributors, 6 major national distributors, but then you have 375 small independent distributors. And that lack of sophistication in the channel part of that makes it a really hard problem to solve.
Yeah, and you start getting to the problem of, like, who holds the power in the relationship? Do you adhere to them? Do they adhere to you? Yeah, and it's funny. I love that you said, like, retail sophisticated a while ago, right? E-commerce boom. This is where we are.
Yep.
And I honestly thought I might have thought that distributors were going to be the next, because they were going to be pressured. But really, I think manufacturers are stepping ahead as far as digital transformations. And I think we're seeing a lot of manufacturers go D2C. They're starting to get a lot better. I think the U.S. market's lagging a little bit, but they're starting to get a lot better there. So it's definitely changing the landscape of how you see interaction.
Awesome. Well, guys, I know we have 5 minutes left, so we're at the kind of the top of the next hour. So let's go ahead and wrap up. I want to thank everybody for joining this discussion, and encourage anybody that wants to dive into the evaluation that we perform on the Salsify platform to give us a holler. But also, you know, if you're interested in getting a demo from Salsify, whether you're evaluating their platform for your business or you're a current customer and this webinar gave you kind of insight on new features that Salsify is investing in and you want to expand that footprint, please engage us because we can absolutely help you through that leg of the journey and walk you through it. Just end on housekeeping, but we will be providing you guys the link to this recording in the next couple days, and then also a link to download the white paper. But again, I think I speak on behalf of the panel where thank you very much for joining us on this Wednesday afternoon, morning for some, and we look forward to continued conversations. Thank you very much, everybody.
Yeah, thank you.